A second chance at family. The sun had barely risen when Jonathan John Whitmore woke to the same silence that had greeted him for years. His mansion was pristine, with its sprawling rooms, gleaming marble floors, and towering walls adorned with art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet the emptiness was deafening. The vast halls of his home were monuments to his success, but also reminders of what he lacked: a family. John, a self-made millionaire in his mid-50s, was known for his sharp mind and an uncanny ability to turn failing businesses into thriving empires. From the outside, he seemed to have it all: wealth, power, and influence. But behind closed doors, he felt the sting of loneliness. No amount of luxury could fill the void left by the life he had never built. This particular morning was no different. As he sipped his black coffee in his grand kitchen, his mind drifted back to a charity gala he'd attended the night before. Among the elegant chatter of wealthy donors and the clinking of champagne glasses, a small moment had shaken him. He had seen a man kneeling on the floor, laughing with his young daughter as they played a simple game. The child's giggle echoed in his mind now, like a haunting melody. The man had nothing John didn't already own, except for one thing: connection. John shook his head, trying to banish the thought. He was a realist. Life had taught him early on that attachments were liabilities. Raised in a cold orphanage, he had spent his childhood yearning for someone to love him. No one ever came. That lesson stayed with him. In life, you only had yourself. Yet lately, a growing sense of dissatisfaction gnawed at him. As he flipped through the morning news channels, his attention was caught by a feature story about adoption. The screen showed a group of 6 young girls, siblings who had been waiting for years for a home. The news anchor explained how older children, especially siblings, were rarely adopted because most families couldn't handle the responsibility. John stared at the screen, the image of the girls clinging to each other etching itself into his memory. Their small smiles were brave but fragile, as if they dared not hope for too much. He turned off the TV, but the girls' faces stayed with him. The rest of the day was a blur. During his meetings, he found himself distracted. He replayed the newscast in his mind. The way the youngest girl had clung to the eldest's arm, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Something about their bond reminded him of his younger self, desperate for a family, but bracing for disappointment. That night, John poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in his study. He stared at the ornate bookshelves that lined the walls, their perfectly arranged volumes a testament to order and control. Yet in his chest, chaos brewed. Could he do it? Could he step into the chaos of raising 6 children? The thought terrified him. He had never even raised a pet, let alone children, especially not children who had faced so much rejection. For the next several days, the idea consumed him. His usual routines felt hollow. When he passed the grand dining table that could seat 12 but never had, he imagined the noise of children filling the space. He pictured sticky fingers on the polished banisters, laughter bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. The vision wasn't without fear. He also imagined tantrums, broken vases, and sleepless nights, but the fear wasn't enough to snuff out the spark of possibility. Finally, he made a decision. John's first visit to the adoption agency was both awkward and revealing. The office smelled faintly of coffee and worn carpet. A kind but skeptical social worker named Claire sat across from him, her eyes scanning his tailored suit and polished shoes. "Mr. Whitmore," she began cautiously, "I must say, this is an unusual request. 6 siblings are, well, it's a lot for anyone." "I understand," John replied, his voice steady. "I know it's a big responsibility, but I have the resources, and more importantly, I think I can give them a good life." Claire's brow furrowed. "Do you have any experience with children, even as a mentor or volunteer?" John hesitated. "No, but I grew up in an orphanage. I understand what it feels like to be left behind." That seemed to soften her stance. She nodded, making notes on her clipboard. "It's commendable, Mr. Whitmore, but these girls have been through a lot. They've faced rejection time and time again. It's not just about providing a roof over their heads. They'll need emotional stability, trust, and patience. I'm prepared for that, John said, though a knot of doubt twisted in his stomach. I want to meet them. Claire arranged a visit for the following week. John spent the days leading up to it preparing, though he wasn't sure what for. He read books on parenting, watched videos about adoption, and even spoke to a friend who had adopted a child. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the moment he stepped into the orphanage. The building was old, its walls chipped and its floors scuffed from years of wear. The scent of cleaning supplies mixed with something faintly sour, a reminder of the struggles hidden behind its walls. Mrs. Porter, the caretaker, greeted John warmly and led him to a playroom. "They're in here," she said, pushing open the door. The sight stopped John in his tracks. 6 little girls sat in a circle on the floor, their mismatched clothes and worn shoes a stark contrast to their vibrant spirits. They were laughing softly, playing with a set of old building blocks. When they noticed John, the laughter faded. They turned to him, their eyes wide with curiosity and caution. "This is Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Porter introduced him. "He wanted to meet you." The eldest girl, Angela, stood protectively in front of her sisters. Her dark eyes studied John with a seriousness that didn't belong on a child's face. She gave a small nod but said nothing. The youngest, a curly-haired girl named Maya, clung to Angela's leg, peeking out shyly. John knelt down to their level. "Hi there," he said gently. "I'm John. I just wanted to meet you all and see how you're doing." The girls exchanged glances. Finally, one of the middle siblings, Hannah, spoke up. Are you gonna take us?" Her voice was small, almost afraid to hope. John felt his chest tighten. He didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep, but he also couldn't bear to see their hope extinguished. "I'd like to," he said honestly, "but only if you want me to." Angela's gaze hardened. "We're not babies," she said firmly. "We don't need someone who'll just leave again." Her words hit John like a punch to the gut. He nodded slowly. "I get it," he said, "and I can't prove to you today that I won't leave, but I can promise you that I'll try my hardest to be the kind of person you can count on." The girls didn't say much else that day, but their cautious glances lingered in John's mind long after he left the orphanage. That night, as he sat alone in his mansion, the silence felt heavier than ever. He knew adopting them would change everything. What he didn't yet realize was how much they would change him. The journey to becoming a father. John Whitmore sat in his leather chair, staring at the stack of paperwork on his desk. The adoption agency had sent over what seemed like an endless list of forms, evaluations, and documents to complete. Each paper he signed felt like a step closer to the unknown. It wasn't just about legalities. It was about committing to 6 lives that were depending on him. Despite the daunting task, he refused to let doubt deter him. He had made his decision. Now he had to make it work. The questions begin. In the weeks following his initial visit to the orphanage, John found himself facing skepticism from nearly everyone in his life. His business associates thought he was losing focus. His closest friend, Richard, who had once been a mentor, was particularly vocal. "You're adopting 6 kids." 6. Richard leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of brandy. "John, you don't even know how to cook. How are you going to manage a house full of children?" John offered a weak smile. "I'll learn. I've hired help for the basics, but I'm not outsourcing being their father." Richard shook his head. "You don't have to do this. Donate to the orphanage if you feel guilty. Start a scholarship fund. But this," he gestured dramatically, "this is a train wreck waiting to happen." John set his glass down with a quiet firmness. "It's not about guilt. It's about giving them a chance at life. A chance I never had. They deserve that." Richard sighed, muttering under his breath. But John didn't waver. He wasn't doing this for approval. He was doing it because he felt he had to. The memory of those girls sitting in a circle, clinging to one another for safety, haunted him. He had been that child once, alone, scared, and hoping for a miracle. Preparing the mansion. John's mansion, with its cold marble floors and cavernous halls, was far from the ideal environment for children. He realized that to make the girls feel at home, he had to make changes. He hired a team of decorators but insisted on personal involvement in every decision. Bright colors, he told the lead designer. Nothing too fancy or delicate. It needs to feel warm and welcoming, not like a museum. They transformed 6 of the guest rooms into personalized spaces for each girl. John carefully chose themes based on the little information he had gathered from their files. Maya, the youngest, loved animals, so her room featured soft pastel walls adorned with playful animal decals. Angela, the eldest, had a passion for books, so her room was lined with shelves and included a cozy reading nook. The playroom became a centerpiece of the renovation. The cold, unused space was turned into a vibrant haven filled with toys, puzzles, beanbags, and even a small indoor swing. John had never shopped for toys before and felt completely out of his depth in the store, but he didn't mind. For the first time, he felt excitement bubbling within him. The first meeting as their dad. When the adoption was finalized, John returned to the orphanage to bring the girls home. The process had taken months of interviews, home inspections, and psychological evaluations. The agency had questioned his motives repeatedly, and while John understood their caution, he grew weary of having to prove himself. The girls were gathered in the common room when he arrived, their belongings packed into old, worn-out suitcases. They looked up as he entered, their faces a mixture of hope and trepidation. Angela, as always, stood protectively in front of her siblings. John knelt down, his voice steady but warm. "Hi, everyone. I know this is a big day. I just want you to know that I'm really happy you're coming home with me." Maya stepped forward first, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. Is there a place for my bunny?" she asked softly. John smiled, his heart aching at her innocence. "Of course. Bunny gets a special spot in your room." Angela watched him closely, her arms crossed. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "We're a lot." "I'm sure," John said firmly, meeting her gaze. "And you don't have to believe me right away. I'll show you." Angela didn't respond but gave a small nod. It was the closest thing to trust he'd seen from her. The first night. The drive to the mansion was quiet, each girl lost in her thoughts. When they arrived, the girls' wide-eyed amazement at the size of the house was obvious, though they tried to hide it. John led them inside, showing them the rooms he had prepared. As they explored, their reactions were subdued. They inspected the bright walls and soft beds, but didn't immediately dive in with joy as he had imagined. Angela, ever cautious, looked at him after seeing her room. "Why did you do all this?" she asked. "Because you deserve it," John said simply. The girls stuck together that first night, all choosing to sleep in one room despite having their own spaces. John didn't push them. He understood that they needed time to adjust. He stood outside their door for a moment, listening to their whispers and giggles. It was the first time the house had felt alive. The challenges begin. The following morning, chaos erupted. John had underestimated how much work it would be to manage 6 children, especially ones who were still adjusting to a new environment. Breakfast was a disaster. Angela burned toast while trying to make it herself, and Maya spilled a glass of juice all over the counter. John, unprepared for the flurry of activity, fumbled through the ordeal but eventually managed to feed everyone. As the days passed, John faced more challenges. The girls were hesitant to trust him and often deferred to Angela for decisions. They squabbled over toys and clung to routines they had developed in the orphanage. Angela, in particular, remained distant. She acted more like a parent than a child, taking on the role of protector for her sisters. One evening, after the younger girls had gone to bed, John found Angela sitting alone in the living room, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. "Can I sit?" he asked. Angela shrugged but didn't object. John settled into a chair across from her. "You've been doing a great job looking out for your sisters," he said, "but you don't have to do it all alone anymore." Angela's eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "I don't know how not to," she said quietly. John leaned forward. "I get it. I had to grow up fast too. But I want you to know it's okay to let someone else help. That's why I'm here." Angela finally looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and hope. "We've been let down before," she said. "A lot." "I won't let you down," John said firmly. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I'll do my best. Always." Angela nodded slowly, and though she didn't say much else, John felt a small shift in her demeanor. A new beginning. The days turned into weeks, and gradually the girls began to settle into their new life. They started opening up in small ways. Maya showed John her drawings, and Hannah asked him to help her with her math homework. Even Angela began to relax, occasionally allowing herself to laugh during movie nights. But the journey was far from over. John knew that earning their trust would take time, patience, and unwavering commitment. What he didn't yet realize was how much these 6 girls would teach him about love, resilience, and the true meaning of family. For John, this was only the beginning of a transformative journey, one that would test him in ways he had never imagined, but also reward him in ways he could never have dreamed. Cracks began to heal. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, illuminating the once sterile hallways with a gentle warmth. For the first time in years, John woke up to the sound of laughter. Faint giggles and hurried footsteps echoed down the marble floors, and as he sat up in bed, he couldn't help but smile. It had been 3 weeks since the girls moved in, and the silence that had defined his home for so long was slowly being replaced by life. The transition wasn't seamless. There were still moments of tension, tears, and miscommunication, but each day brought small victories. Breakfast battles. In the kitchen, chaos was already underway. Angela was perched on a stool, carefully flipping pancakes while Maya eagerly watched, her small hands clasped together. Hannah and Sarah, 2 of the middle siblings, were at the table arguing over a box of crayons, while the twins, Ava and Emily, sat quietly, coloring side by side. John entered the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Good morning, ladies." Maya was the first to respond, beaming at him. "Good morning, Mr. John." "It's just John," he reminded her with a chuckle. "How's breakfast going?" Angela glanced over her shoulder. "It's fine. We've got it handled." John leaned against the counter, observing her. Angela had taken on the role of caretaker for her sisters long before they arrived at the mansion, and despite his efforts to assure her she didn't have to, she still insisted on being the one in charge. "Smells great," John said. "But how about I take over so you can sit down and eat with everyone?" Angela's expression tightened. "I'm fine. I can do it." John didn't push. He learned quickly that Angela's trust wasn't something he could demand. It had to be earned. Instead, he moved to help the other girls, distracting them with lighthearted chatter as they finished their artwork. Bonding attempts. Later that day, John decided to take the girls to a nearby park. It was a small gesture, but he wanted to give them a sense of normalcy, something they hadn't experienced in years. The girls were hesitant at first. The idea of leaving the safety of the mansion, where they had begun to carve out a fragile sense of stability, made them uneasy. But Maya's excitement was contagious, and soon the others reluctantly agreed. At the park, the girls slowly began to relax. Maya and the twins raced to the swings, their laughter ringing out as they competed to see who could swing the highest. Hannah and Sarah found a patch of grass to sit on, their heads bent together as they collected wildflowers. Angela, as always, hung back, her arms crossed as she watched her sisters from a distance. John approached her, his steps careful. "You don't have to stay on the sidelines, you know." Angela shrugged. "I'm fine here." "You know, when I was your age, I hated swings too," John said, sitting on a nearby bench. but not because I didn't like them. I was just afraid to let go of the ground. Angela glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Were you scared of falling? Maybe, John said thoughtfully. But I think I was more scared of not having anyone to catch me if I did. Angela's gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly looked away. I'm not scared, she muttered. I know, John said gently. But it's okay if you are. Angela didn't respond, but for the first time, she sat down beside him. They watched the other girls play, their laughter filling the air, and John felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to break through her walls. An unexpected connection. As the days turned into weeks, John began to notice small changes. The girls started to settle into routines, their initial hesitation giving way to cautious optimism. They still had their moments, arguments over toys, tears over misunderstandings. But the mansion began to feel less like a house and more like a home. One evening, John found himself in his study, reviewing a contract for an upcoming business deal. He was so engrossed in his work that he didn't hear the knock at the door until it came again, louder this time. Come in, he called. The door creaked open, and to his surprise, it was Angela. She lingered in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Do you need something? John asked, setting his papers aside. Angela hesitated. I wanted to ask you something. John gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. What's on your mind? She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the room. Why did you choose us? She asked finally. There were so many other kids. Why 6? Why us? John leaned back in his chair, caught off guard by the question. He took a moment to gather his thoughts. When I saw you girls on the news, he began, I couldn't stop thinking about you. I saw the way you held on to each other, the way you looked out for your sisters. It reminded me of something I'd lost a long time ago. Family. Angela's brow furrowed. But you didn't even know us. No, John admitted, but I knew enough. I knew you deserved better. And I wanted to be the person to give that to you. Angela looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. What if we're too much? John's heart ached at her words. He stood, crossing the room to stand in front of her. You're not too much, Angela, he said firmly. You're exactly enough. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere, no matter how hard it gets. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. For a moment, it seemed like she might cry, but she quickly blinked the tears away and nodded. Okay, she whispered. A turning point. That conversation marked a turning point. While Angela still held on to her protective instincts, she began to let John in little by little. She started asking him questions about his past, about the orphanage where he grew up. John shared his experiences openly, hoping to show her that he understood, at least in some small way, what she had been through. The younger girls, meanwhile, were thriving. Maya, in particular, had become a ray of sunshine in John's life. She followed him around the house, peppering him with questions about everything from his work to his favorite color. One afternoon, as John sat in the living room reading, Maya climbed onto the couch beside him. Mr. John, she asked, clutching her stuffed bunny. It's just John, he reminded her with a smile. What's up? Can I call you Daddy? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John felt a lump rise in his throat. He set the book aside and pulled her into his lap. You can call me anything you want, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The cracks begin to heal. As the weeks turned into months, the girls began to trust John more. There were still challenges, nights when nightmares woke them up screaming, days when old fears resurfaced. But slowly, the cracks in their hearts began to heal. For John, the process was transformative. He had entered this journey thinking he would save these girls, but he hadn't expected them to save him in return. They filled his once empty mansion with life, laughter, and love, and for the first time in years, he felt like he truly belonged. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Together, They were building something extraordinary, a family. Trials and triumphs. It had been 6 months since the girls moved in, and the once silent mansion had become a kaleidoscope of sound and motion. Every corner of the house seemed to pulse with life. John's once pristine office now bore crayon marks on the walls. The hallways were littered with forgotten shoes and toys, and the dining table was no longer a symbol of sterile wealth, but a battlefield for laughter, arguments, and shared meals. But for all the joy, the journey was far from smooth. Parenting 6 children, especially 6 children with histories of abandonment and trauma, was a challenge John had underestimated. Each girl carried her own struggles, and as much as John tried, he couldn't solve them all at once. A family fracture. The first major conflict erupted one crisp autumn evening. John had just finished preparing dinner, spaghetti, one of the few meals he had mastered, when he heard shouting from the playroom. He hurried in to find Angela and Sarah locked in a heated argument. Sarah's face was red, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Angela stood rigid, her fists clenched. "What's going on?" John asked, his voice calm but firm. "She broke my bracelet," Sarah cried, holding up a broken string of beads. "It was an accident," Angela shot back, her voice defensive. "I said I was sorry." "You don't care," Sarah yelled, her voice cracking. "You just boss us around like you're in charge of everything." Angela's expression darkened, and she turned to leave the room. "I don't have to deal with this." John stepped in front of her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Angela, wait." She glared at him, her eyes flashing with frustration. "I said it was an accident. Why does everyone always blame me?" John knelt to her level. "No one's blaming you, but walking away won't fix this. Let's talk it out." Angela hesitated, her jaw tight, but she eventually sat down on the couch. Sarah clung to her broken bracelet, sniffling. John took a deep breath, trying to channel every parenting book he'd read. "Angela," he began, "I know you didn't mean to break it, but Sarah's upset because that bracelet meant something to her. Maybe you could help her fix it." Angela crossed her arms. "Why should I? It's just a dumb bracelet." "It's not dumb to her," John said gently. "And sometimes, being part of a family means showing we care, even when we don't think it's a big deal." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line, but after a moment, she sighed. "Fine. I'll help her fix it." John smiled. "Thank you. And Sarah, can you try to remember that Angela didn't mean to hurt you?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Okay." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. John knew that teaching them to navigate their emotions and conflicts would take time. What mattered was that they were willing to try. Angela's walls began to crack. Angela remained the toughest nut to crack. She had assumed the role of protector for so long that letting someone else take charge felt unnatural. She challenged John constantly, questioning his decisions and pushing boundaries to see if he would stick around. But beneath her defiance was a vulnerable girl desperate for stability. One rainy afternoon, John found her in the library, curled up in a chair with a book. She didn't acknowledge him as he entered, so he sat quietly in the chair opposite her. "What are you reading?" he asked after a few minutes. Angela glanced up briefly. "It's about a girl who runs away from home." John nodded. "Sounds heavy. Why'd you pick it?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I guess. I get it. Wanting to run away." John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to run away, Angela. Not from here." She scoffed. "You say that now." "I'll say it every day if I have to," John said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you, unless you want to." Angela's eyes softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it. "We'll see." It wasn't much, but John considered it progress. Maya's birthday surprise. As the girls settled into their new life, John began to learn more about their individual personalities. Maya, the youngest, was full of boundless energy and imagination. She had a knack for drawing and often left little sketches around the house, flowers, animals, and sometimes a stick figure family that always included John. When her 7th birthday approached, John decided to throw her a surprise party. It was the first time any of the girls had celebrated a birthday in years, and he wanted to make it special. He involved all the girls in the planning, assigning them tasks to keep them engaged. Angela, to his surprise, took charge of the decorations, meticulously arranging balloons and streamers. Hannah and Sarah worked together to bake a cake, with some guidance, while Ava and Emily helped wrap presents. On the day of the party, Maya's eyes lit up when she walked into the decorated living room. "Is this for me?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "Of course," John said, scooping her up. "Happy birthday, kiddo." Maya's smile was radiant, and as the girls sang Happy Birthday, John felt an overwhelming sense of pride. For the first time, they felt like a real family, a ghost from the past. Just as things were starting to settle, an unexpected phone call threatened to disrupt their progress. It was from Claire, the social worker who had overseen the adoption. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her tone hesitant, "I wanted to give you a heads up. The girl's biological mother has reached out. She's expressed interest in reconnecting with them." John's stomach sank. He had known this was a possibility, but hearing it out loud made it real. The girl's mother had abandoned them years ago, leaving them in the care of strangers. Could she really expect to walk back into their lives now? "What does that mean for the girls?" he asked. "Legally, nothing," Claire assured him. "The adoption is final. But emotionally, it could be complicated. I suggest you talk to them about it before she makes contact." That evening, John gathered the girls in the living room. He explained the situation as delicately as he could, trying to gauge their reactions. Angela's face hardened immediately. "She doesn't get to do this," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "She left us. She doesn't get to come back now." Maya, on the other hand, looked conflicted. "But maybe she's changed," she said softly. "Maybe she wants to be our mom again." John knelt in front of them, his heart aching. "I know this is a lot to take in. Whatever happens, it's your choice. If you want to see her, we'll figure it out. If you don't, that's okay too. But no matter what, I'm here for you." Angela's walls went up again after that conversation, but John didn't blame her. Trust was fragile, and her mother's reappearance had shaken it. Still, he was determined to navigate this challenge with them, no matter how difficult it became. A family strengthened. Despite the uncertainty surrounding their mother, the girls continued to grow closer to John. They began to share more of themselves, stories from their past, their hopes for the future, and even their fears. Slowly but surely, the cracks in their hearts were being filled with love and trust. One night, as John tucked Maya into bed, she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "Good night, Daddy," she whispered, her voice sleepy but full of contentment. John froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple word. It wasn't the first time she'd called him that, but each time felt like a gift. "Good night, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As he left her room, he found Angela standing in the hallway, watching him. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" she asked. "No," he said softly. "I'm not." Angela nodded, her expression unreadable. But as she turned to head to her room, she paused. "Good night, Dad." The word was quiet, almost hesitant, but it was there. And for John, it was everything. A mother's shadow. The days after the phone call from Claire were fraught with tension. Though the girls carried on with their routines, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the mansion. Each girl processed the news of their biological mother differently, and John found himself navigating a minefield of emotions he hadn't anticipated. Angela withdrew almost entirely, spending hours alone in her room. Maya, ever the optimist, spoke frequently about the possibility of reconnecting with their mother, her small voice tinged with hope. The other girls hovered somewhere in between, unsure of what to think or feel. John knew he needed to tread carefully. Angela's burden. It was a stormy evening when John decided to confront Angela. The rain lashed against the tall windows as he knocked on her bedroom door. "Go away," Angela's voice called out, muffled but sharp. "It's me," John said. "Can I come in?" A long pause followed before the door creaked open slightly. Angela sat on her bed, knees drawn to her chest, her face partially hidden behind her arms. John stepped inside, pulling a chair close to the bed, but not too close. "You've been quiet lately," he began gently. "Want to talk about it?" Angela scoffed, shaking her head. "What's there to talk about? She doesn't care about us. She never did." John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It's okay to be angry, Angela. You have every right to be." Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "I'm not angry. I'm fine." John met her gaze steadily. "I don't believe that. And it's okay if you're not fine. You don't have to keep everything bottled up." Angela's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away furiously. "She left us," she said, her voice cracking. "She promised she'd come back, but she never did. I had to be the one to take care of everyone because she didn't. And now she thinks she can just show up and fix everything." John felt his chest tighten at her words. He wanted to reassure her, to make everything better, but he knew that wasn't what she needed. She needed to be heard. "You've carried so much, Angela," he said softly. "More than any child should have to, but you're not alone anymore. You don't have to do it all by yourself." Angela looked at him, her tough exterior faltering. "What if she ruins everything?" she whispered. "What if she takes them away?" "She can't take anything from you," John assured her. "You and your sisters are a family now. This is your home, and no one can change that unless you let them." For the first time in weeks, Angela leaned into John's words. She didn't say much more, but when he left her room, he felt a glimmer of hope that she was beginning to trust him. Maya's hope. While Angela grappled with anger, Maya clung to the possibility of a reunion. She often spoke about her mother as if she were a long-lost hero who would come back and make everything right. One afternoon, Maya approached John as he worked in his study. She held her stuffed rabbit tightly, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy?" she asked softly. John looked up, smiling. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "Do you think she misses us?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with innocence. "Do you think she's sorry?" John set his pen down, his heart aching at the question. He didn't want to shatter her hope, but he also didn't want to give her false expectations. "I think," he said carefully, "that people make mistakes, sometimes really big ones, and sometimes they're sorry. But being sorry doesn't always mean they know how to fix things." Maya frowned, clutching her rabbit tighter. "But what if she's different now?" "She might be," John said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "And if you want to see her, we can figure that out together. But no matter what happens, I want you to remember that you're safe here. This is your home, and nothing can change that." Maya nodded slowly, her small face deep in thought. "Okay," she whispered. "A family meeting." John knew the decision about whether to see their mother couldn't be made individually. It was a family matter, and everyone's voice needed to be heard. One evening, he gathered the girls in the living room. They sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from wary to curious. Angela sat with her arms crossed, her protective posture unmistakable. Maya clung to her rabbit, while the others exchanged nervous glances. "I wanted to talk about something important," John began, his tone calm but serious. "Claire told me your mother wants to see you. I need to know how you all feel about that." Angela was the first to speak. "I don't want to see her," she said firmly. "She doesn't deserve it." Maya looked up, her eyes pleading. "But what if she's changed? What if she really wants to be with us?" Hannah, the quietest of the group, spoke hesitantly. "What if it just makes things worse?" The twins, Ava and Emily, nodded in agreement, their identical faces mirroring uncertainty. John held up his hands. There's no right or wrong answer here. If some of you want to see her and others don't, that's okay. We'll figure it out together. But I promise you this, no one will be forced to do anything they don't want to. The room fell silent, each girl lost in her thoughts. Finally, Angela stood up. I still don't think it's a good idea, she said, her voice softer than before. But if Maya wants to see her, I'll go, just to make sure she's safe. John nodded, his heart swelling with pride at Angela's protectiveness. Thank you, Angela. That means a lot. The meeting. When the day of the meeting arrived, John was more nervous than he had been in years. He had arranged for it to take place at a neutral location, a cozy community center with a private room. Only Angela, Maya, and John went, while the other girls stayed home with a trusted babysitter. As they waited, Maya fidgeted with her rabbit, her small face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Angela sat stiffly beside her, her gaze fixed on the door. When their mother entered, the air in the room seemed to shift. She was a slender woman with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. She looked at her daughters as if seeing them for the first time. Maya, she whispered, her voice trembling. Angela. Maya's face lit up, and she ran to her mother, who knelt to embrace her. Angela, however, remained seated, her arms crossed. John watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy. He could see the conflict in Angela's eyes, the longing for a connection, and the anger at the betrayal. Aftermath. The meeting was brief and emotional. Their mother expressed regret and spoke of wanting to make amends, but Angela remained guarded. Maya, ever hopeful, seemed thrilled by the encounter, but John could sense her confusion. On the drive home, Angela broke the silence. She said she wants to visit again. Do we have to? John glanced at her in the rearview mirror. No, Angela. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. Maya chimed in. I liked seeing her, but I'm happy here too. John smiled softly. That's all I want. For you to be happy. Though the encounter left the family with more questions than answers, John knew they would face them together. The girls were stronger than they realized, and so was he. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would navigate them as a family. A love that stays. The months after the meeting with the girl's biological mother were marked by both healing and challenges. The encounter had stirred deep emotions, reopening wounds that John had been working so hard to help the girls mend. Yet, as the dust settled, something remarkable began to happen. A newfound sense of unity emerged among them. The girls leaned on each other in ways John hadn't seen before, and they began to lean on him too. A home full of laughter. It was a Saturday morning, and the mansion buzzed with energy. The smell of freshly baked muffins wafted through the air, thanks to Hannah and Sarah's newfound love of baking. Maya darted through the halls with her stuffed rabbit in tow, her giggles echoing as Ava and Emily chased after her. Angela sat at the dining table, helping John sort through a pile of school forms. Her usual guarded demeanor had softened over time, and while she wasn't overly chatty, her quiet presence spoke volumes. Do you think I'll ever need algebra? Angela asked, holding up a worksheet. John chuckled. Probably not unless you become an engineer or a scientist. Angela rolled her eyes but smirked. Great. Waste of time then. John grinned at her sarcasm. Well, sometimes life throws us stuff we don't think we need, and later we realize it was worth learning. Angela gave him a look that suggested she wasn't convinced, but her smirk lingered. Moments like these had become more frequent. Angela, once fiercely independent and distant, had started to open up in her own way. She still carried the weight of being the protector, but now she let John share that role. A celebration of family. As winter approached, John decided to host a family dinner, not just for him and the girls, but for the people who had helped them along the way. He invited Claire, the social worker, and Mrs. Porter, the caretaker from the orphanage. Even Richard, his skeptical friend, was on the guest list, though John wasn't sure if he'd come. The girls were excited but nervous. They had never experienced a formal dinner, and John could see the anxiety in their eyes as they tried to figure out which forks and knives to use. Angela, ever practical, whispered to the younger girls, "Just copy what he does," nodding toward John. The dinner was a mix of laughter, awkwardness, and heartfelt moments. Claire raised a toast to John for stepping into a role many would have shied away from. "You've given these girls something invaluable," she said, her voice warm. "Not just a home, but a family." John's eyes misted as he glanced at the girls, who were beaming with pride. Even Angela, who usually shied away from public attention, gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Richard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "I didn't think you could do it, John," he admitted. "But seeing this, I was wrong. You're a better man than I gave you credit for." The night ended with the girls gathered around the fireplace, laughing as Maya told an exaggerated story about a school play. For the first time in years, John felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. The art of forgiveness. Despite the growing bonds within the family, the shadow of their mother lingered. She had written letters, which John passed along to the girls without pressure. Some read them. Others didn't. Angela, unsurprisingly, ignored them altogether. One evening, after Maya had excitedly shared a letter she'd received, Angela stormed into John's study. "Why are you letting her do this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why do you let her keep messing with us?" John set down the book he'd been reading. "Angela, I'm not letting her do anything. She has the right to reach out, and you have the right to ignore her." Angela's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "She doesn't deserve it. She doesn't deserve us." John stood and walked over to her, his tone calm but firm. "You're right. She hurt you, and it's okay to feel angry about that. But carrying that anger doesn't hurt her, it hurts you." Angela looked away, her jaw tight. "I don't care." "I think you do," John said gently. "And that's okay too. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what she did. It just means letting go of the power her mistakes have over you." Angela didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. She stood there for a long time before finally nodding, just barely, and walking out of the room. A promise kept. Winter turned into spring, and life at the mansion continued to blossom. The girls thrived in school, made friends, and found hobbies that brought them joy. Angela joined the school debate team, where her sharp wit and confidence shone. Hannah and Sarah became the family's unofficial chefs, experimenting with recipes that sometimes ended in delicious success and sometimes in disasters. Ava and Emily discovered a love for music, filling the house with the sounds of their budding piano duets. Maya, ever the artist, turned one of the unused guest rooms into her personal studio, her colorful drawings covering every wall. One evening, as the family gathered for movie night, John sat back and observed the scene. The girls were sprawled across the couch, arguing over which film to watch. Maya was tugging on Angela's sleeve, trying to convince her to pick a cartoon, while the twins were whispering conspiratorially about sneaking extra popcorn. John's heart swelled. This was everything he had dreamed of and more. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, was now a sanctuary of love and laughter. An unforgettable gift. On the anniversary of their adoption, the girls surprised John with a gift. They led him into the backyard, where they had set up a makeshift stage. Angela stepped forward, holding a small scrapbook. "This is for you," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "We wanted to show you what you mean to us." John opened the scrapbook, his hands trembling. Each page was filled with pictures, drawings, and handwritten notes from the girls. Maya had drawn their family, complete with her stuffed rabbit. Hannah and Sarah had included recipes they wanted to cook for him. Ava and Emily had pasted sheet music from their favorite songs. And Angela had written a letter. It read, "Dear Dad, I never thought I'd call anyone that again. But you earned it. You didn't just give us a house, you gave us a home. You gave us a chance to feel safe, to laugh, to dream again. I don't say it enough, but thank you for everything. We love you." John's vision blurred as tears streamed down his face. He looked at the girls, who were watching him anxiously. "I don't deserve you," he said, his voice breaking. "But I'm so grateful for you. I love you all more than I can ever say." The girls rushed to hug him, their arms wrapping around him tightly. For the first time, John wasn't just a man in a mansion. He was a father, a real father. And in that moment, he knew he had finally found his place in the world. A place that was full, messy, loud, and perfect. The legacy of love. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came a rhythm of life that felt almost ordinary, a word John Whitmore had never thought would apply to him. The once silent halls of his mansion were now filled with laughter, music, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to do the dishes. For John, the journey that had begun with doubt and fear had blossomed into something extraordinary, a life full of purpose, love, and belonging. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and the Whitmore family was no exception. That summer would prove to be one of the most challenging and ultimately rewarding chapters in their story. A visitor from the past. It was a sweltering July afternoon when Claire, the social worker, called with unexpected news. The girl's biological mother, Marissa, had requested a formal meeting. She wanted to speak to all 6 of her daughters together, this time to apologize directly, and, as she put it, find closure. John's stomach tightened as he listened to Claire explain. "She says she understands if they don't want to see her," Claire said, "but she wants the chance to say goodbye properly." John thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. He knew he couldn't make the choice for the girls, but he also knew how much the meeting could stir up old wounds. That evening, he gathered the girls in the living room. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest they had ever had as a family. The girls decide. Angela was the first to speak, her voice sharp and decisive. "No, I don't want to see her. She had her chance, and she blew it." Maya, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up at Angela with wide eyes. "But what if she's really sorry this time? Maybe she just wants to make things right." "It's not that simple, Maya," Angela said, her tone softening slightly but still firm. "She left us. Saying sorry doesn't fix that." The other girls chimed in, their opinions divided. Ava and Emily sided with Angela, their fear of being hurt again outweighing any curiosity. Hannah and Sarah, however, leaned toward Maya's perspective, expressing cautious interest in hearing what Marissa had to say. John listened quietly, letting them voice their feelings without interruption. When they had finished, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I know this is hard," he said, "and there's no right or wrong choice here. If some of you want to meet her and some don't, that's okay. We'll respect each other's decisions." Angela crossed her arms, clearly unhappy. "So what happens if we don't all agree?" "Then we'll figure it out together," John said gently. "But I promise you, no one will be forced to do anything they're not comfortable with." After much discussion and a few tears, it was decided that only Maya, Hannah, and Sarah would attend the meeting. Angela and the twins opted to stay home, and John made arrangements to ensure they would feel supported no matter what. The meeting. The day of the meeting was tense. John accompanied Maya, Hannah, and Sarah to a quiet cafe, where Marissa was waiting at a corner table. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of a napkin. When her daughters entered, her eyes filled with tears. Maya ran to her immediately, wrapping her small arms around her. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered, her voice full of both hope and sadness. Hannah and Sarah hung back, their expressions guarded but curious. John stayed near the entrance, giving the girls space while keeping a watchful eye. Marissa's voice trembled as she spoke. "I've made so many mistakes," she began, "and I know I can never undo the hurt I caused. But I want you to know how sorry I am. Leaving you was the worst decision I ever made." Maya clung to her mother's words, her innocent heart willing to believe them. Hannah and Sarah, however, pressed her with questions. "Why did you leave?" Sarah asked, her voice quivering. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" Marissa's face crumpled as she tried to explain. She spoke of addiction, poverty, and shame, of feeling unworthy and incapable of being the mother they deserved. Her honesty was raw, and while it didn't erase the pain, it provided some clarity. By the end of the meeting, the girls had mixed emotions. Maya hugged her mother tightly, while Hannah and Sarah offered tentative goodbyes. Marissa didn't push for more, understanding that she had done all she could. Back at home, when they returned, the atmosphere in the mansion was heavy. Angela avoided eye contact with John, clearly wrestling with her emotions. The twins, who had been playing in the garden, asked questions that Maya eagerly answered while Hannah and Sarah remained silent. That night, Angela found John in his study. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, but there was no anger in her eyes, just uncertainty. "Did they forgive her?" she asked quietly. "I think they're still figuring that out," John said. "Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once." Angela nodded, her gaze distant. "Do you think I should have gone?" John set his book down and stood, walking over to her. "I think you made the choice that felt right for you, and that's okay. You don't have to do what anyone else does, Angela. This is your journey, and it's okay to take it at your own pace." Angela hesitated before nodding. "Thanks," she said softly. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Good night, Dad." A testament to growth. The summer ended with a surprise for John. On the last weekend before school resumed, the girls insisted he stay out of the living room for the day. They'd whispered and giggled as they worked on something, refusing to let him peek. That evening, they called him into the room. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. They had transformed the space into a family art gallery, with drawings, photos, and handwritten notes covering the walls. Maya stepped forward, holding a large canvas. On it was a painting of their family, John at the center, surrounded by the 6 girls, each holding hands. "This is for you," Maya said, her face glowing with pride, "because you're the one who made us a family." John's vision blurred as he looked at the painting, his heart swelling with emotion. He turned to the girls, his voice thick with gratitude. "You didn't just make me a father, you gave me a reason to believe in love again." The girls hugged him tightly, their laughter filling the room. In that moment, John knew that while their journey had been difficult, it was also beautiful, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the unshakable bond of family. As he looked around the room, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, was now a living, breathing home. And for the first time in his life, John felt complete. A future built together. As the years passed, the once fractured Whitmore family blossomed into a cohesive unit. The mansion, which had once echoed with loneliness, now hummed with life, energy, and purpose. Each day brought new challenges and triumphs, but together, they faced them with courage and love. For John, the journey from a solitary millionaire to a devoted father of 6 was nothing short of transformative. But life is rarely static, and just as the family settled into their rhythm, new opportunities and trials emerged to test their bonds. Angela's leap of faith. Angela's transition from guarded protector to a confident young woman was a slow but steady process. By the time she turned 17, she had become a force to be reckoned with, sharp, determined, and fiercely loyal to her sisters. But as her high school graduation approached, Angela found herself at a crossroads. One evening, she sat with John in his study, the two of them poring over college brochures. Her acceptance letters lay in a neat pile on the desk, each one a testament to her hard work. Yet, Angela seemed hesitant. "I don't know if I can leave," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. John looked up, surprised. "Why not? You've earned this, Angela. You've worked so hard." Angela fidgeted with the edge of a brochure. "What if they need me?" I've been the one looking out for them my whole life. What happens if I'm not here?" John leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Angela, you've done an incredible job taking care of your sisters. But part of growing up is learning to trust that they'll be okay, even without you right here." Angela met his gaze, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if they're not?" John smiled gently. "That's what family is for. We lean on each other when we need to, and I'll be here to make sure they're okay. You've given them so much, Angela. Now it's time to give something to yourself." Angela nodded slowly, her expression softening. "You really think I can do this?" "I know you can," John said firmly. Maya's big dreams. Meanwhile, Maya had grown into a spirited and creative teenager. Her passion for art had only deepened over the years, and her paintings now adorn nearly every wall of the mansion. One day, as John admired her latest piece, a vibrant depiction of their family garden, she hesitantly approached him. "Dad," she began, her voice tinged with both excitement and nervousness, "there's this art program I want to apply to. It's in New York." John turned to her, his brow lifting. "New York? That's a big step." "I know," Maya said quickly, "but it's a summer program, and it's really competitive. I probably won't even get in, but I want to try." John smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "Of course you should try, and if you get in, we'll figure it out." Maya beamed, her nervousness melting into excitement. "Really? You think I could do it?" "I don't think," John said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know. A test of strength." While Angela prepared for college and Maya focused on her art, the other girls faced challenges of their own. Ava and Emily, though inseparable, struggled with the pressures of high school. Sarah and Hannah, now teenagers, wrestled with their identities and the lingering effects of their early childhood experiences. One particularly difficult evening, Sarah had a meltdown over a failed math test. She locked herself in her room, refusing to speak to anyone. John sat outside her door, his voice calm but insistent. "Sarah," he said softly, "it's okay to be upset, but you don't have to go through this alone." There was silence for a moment before the door creaked open. Sarah stood there, her eyes red and puffy. "I'm not smart enough," she said, tears streaming down her face. John knelt in front of her, his heart aching. "That's not true, Sarah. You're one of the smartest, most capable people I know. And just because you stumbled doesn't mean you failed." Sarah sniffled, her voice trembling. "But what if I keep messing up?" John pulled her into a hug, his voice firm. "Then we'll figure it out together. You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to try. And I'll always be here to help you." A shared mission. As the family grew stronger, they decided to channel their experiences into helping others. Together, they launched the Whitmore Foundation for Foster Children, a nonprofit aimed at providing resources, mentorship, and opportunities for children in the foster care system. The girls threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm. Angela used her leadership skills to organize events, while Maya created artwork for fundraisers. Ava and Emily wrote songs about their journey, performing at charity galas. Sarah and Hannah worked on outreach, connecting with other foster children, and sharing their stories. At the Foundation's first major event, John stood on stage with the girls by his side. He looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. "Family isn't about blood," he began. "It's about love, trust, and the people who stand by you no matter what. These 6 incredible young women taught me that. And now we want to give that same sense of belonging to others." The audience erupted in applause, and John turned to the girls, who were smiling through tears. Together, they had turned their pain into purpose, and the impact of their work would ripple far beyond their own lives. The unshakable bond. Years later, as John sat on the porch of the now bustling Whitmore estate, he watched his daughters, grown but still inseparable, laughing and reminiscing. Angela had just returned from her job as a lawyer, while Maya was preparing for her first solo art exhibit. Ava and Emily were composing a song for an upcoming event, and Sarah and Hannah were planning a community outreach program. John's heart swelled with gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every tear, and every sleepless night. His life, once defined by wealth and isolation, was now a testament to the power of love and resilience. As the girls gathered around him, Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay, Dad?" John smiled, his eyes misty. "Never better." In that moment, surrounded by the family they had built together, John knew one thing for certain. Love had given him a legacy far greater than money or success. It had given him a life full of meaning, joy, and the unshakable bond of family. A bond that would endure for generations to come.